I have a good friend here, Manuel. He's a council member, and I'm excited to have him on to talk about all the details he can provide you on how to improve a city, what he does for a living.
Hi everyone, I'm Manuel Chavez, a council member of the great city of Costa Mesa, District 4. I've just been elected this past election in 2020, and now I'm my 5th year serving on city council. Happy to be here with you guys and sharing my insights and just having a good time with Andrew.
3 balls, 2 strikes, pressure is on. This is where we discuss real estate, property improvement, and business. Together, we'll strategize on how to win. Welcome to the Full Count. 5 years went by quick then.
They did.
Weren't you like the youngest Latino in Costa Mesa for city council at one point?
Yeah, so I am the youngest in city history. And then
Wow.
I was one of the first Latinos alongside NJMR and Arliss Reynolds.
How's that feel? A
So
major accomplishment, or?
honestly, I tried to not highlight that when I was running for city council.
Right.
I feel like oftentimes people want to focus on like their age or other aspects of themselves,
To
but
get elected.
what I realize is people want to know, like, do you care about my community? Do you care about the values I care about? So definitely happy to be the youngest history in Costa Mesa, but wasn't something I was trying to do. Just wanted to get elected and do good things for my community.
Yeah, it's always good to see someone that's Latino to do it too, just because we don't see that demographic all the time, in particular areas, right? Of course, but it's definitely a wonderful thing, and I'm proud of you as a friend that you're able to do that, and you're still have a long trajectory ahead.
Thank you.
I wanted to, just see, why did you decide to go into, politics, city council? Of all the things you could have done, you chose that path.
Yeah, no, great question. So I always say my journey in politics began way before I even thought of running for office.
Mm-hmm.
It began with my mom and my dad. So my dad, he came to this country as an immigrant, undocumented, and then he got citizenship through Ronald Reagan. We had the last big reform for immigration. So my dad always kind of viewed politics as something that was not a right; it was a privilege. Mm-hmm. So when I was growing up, my dad always made sure that we watched every debate for president. That he would make sure I saw him voting for president or voting for every election cycle, and kind of instilling that like sense of like civic engagement and civic duty.
So he instilled that in you.
Yeah.
Okay.
To my bones. I cannot miss an election, even special elections. You got to vote, man. It's part of the process of democracy.
Vote. That's right.
My mom was more about service, so my mom always liked volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being like 6 years old, and we go volunteer at a soup kitchen and go volunteer for at the school program. So I think those two things kind of was the backdrop of my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just growing up in Costa Mesa, which when I was growing up never had a percent council was Hispanic.
Right.
And just seeing the effects that I had in my district, in my community, really realized that if I wanted to make a change in my community, I could do it. I should do it where I'm from.
Right.
So for me, that's kind of the whole backdrop of politics, how I got into it and how I ended up falling in love with it.
That's fantastic, because I feel like a lot of people don't, if you have parents, you're already in a good advantage in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they were able to instill that from the service, and then, being patriotic in terms of participating in democracy, I mean, that's major what you had right there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very blessed to have 2 good parents.
Yeah.
So for me, originally when I ran for city council, it was really about fixing these like long-term issues that were like kind of forgotten in my district, because I cover the most Hispanic part of Costa Mesa. So a lot of the issues I was working on fixing were like the potholes, like lack of striping on streets, street repavements. The bigger issues were really lack of park spaces, and it was solving our homeless problem at the time. So happy to say we have done big strides on both of those 2 things. I'm happy to show
potholes and homelessness.
Homeless and parks.
Okay.
So in the past 4 years, what we did on each of those things. Well, the potholes were easy, just prioritizing.
But is it easy? Because I see some cities that there's potholes everywhere.
Well, it's easy for Costa Mesa because we have good revenues, right? We have Sacos Plaza, a really big commercial space that's always doing well, and then we do a lot to invest in our city. So make sure we're trying to be a foodie place. We have 2 Michelin stars in Costa Mesa. We always do our best to make sure that people can like expand their businesses in a quick and efficient manner.
Right.
Attract in new companies like Andrew, which does defense contracting.
Right. Yeah, I saw that in the Orange County Business Journal, actually.
Exactly. So for us, the city's first goal is to keep residents safe. The second goal is to make sure we have revenues to make sure we enhance the community's quality of life.
Right.
So for me, luckily in Costa Mesa, we already had revenues that we could divert. to those streets. What I will say though is Costa Mesa does have the second best streets in all Orange County.
I didn't know that.
We're very
Really?
proud. Only Irvine beats us, which is okay.
Okay, Irvine makes sense. Irvine is like, yeah.
So that was a pretty easy fix. Just acknowledging, hey, let's move these up the docket so folks feel like we're listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
The homelessness piece was really cool because we actually have a homeless shelter in partnership with Newport Beach, and it's really interesting because the Ninth Circuit judges, federal circuit judges, allow cities to enforce anti-camping ordinances should they have a homeless shelter. So in other words, it's kind of a carrot and stick approach,
right?
Where someone's homeless in Costa Mesa, we have officers or even caseworkers that say, hey, if you want to stay in Costa Mesa, you need to go to the homeless shelter and get help and get services and have a roof over your head. If they don't want to do that, then we have the right to tell them to leave Costa Mesa.
Okay, so that's only done because it's set up in that manner, though?
Yes.
I feel like every city should be able to do that, but why is the reason that they don't?
Yeah, so the Ninth Circuit Court, this federal court, what they ruled in California, like, all the Western states, was you can only enforce anti-camping ordinances. You can't have like a tent like loiter around. If you have a place for that homeless resident to go. So basically, it's incentivizing cities to either have a homeless shelter,
I see,
or a partnership with a homeless shelter.
Okay.
So I like it. It's a good approach because on one hand, we're giving folks that want to get help the chance to get help, and the folks that don't want to get help because they don't want to get help.
And a lot of them don't want to get help, in my opinion.
We've seen a mixed bag. We've seen some residents want to get help and then they struggle with the help because there's rules in the shelter. So, example,
a lot of them don't want to follow the rules.
Yeah, and that's where it gets hard because it's like you see they want to get help, but they're not ready yet. So it's an interesting thing that cities have to do. But as I've always noticed, is a lot of times when federal government or state government really can't solve problems, it falls on cities. Right.
And that's why people say that you should definitely care about, the overall federal government and what's going on in policy, but it's very important to know what's happening at home, which is at your city. Yeah. And then if you want to go even more narrow, at your district, right?
Yeah. So that's progress there. And then just to round it out, with the green space, we actually received $1.2 million to expand one of the pocket parks in my district. And then we received a $10 million bulk donation from Senator Dave Min to do park expansions all Costa Mesa. So that pot of money, about $11.2 million, is going to go to expanding parks in my district,
right? And
also doing some rehab work in Fairview Park, which are like nature reserve park in Costa Mesa. So happy to do progress, but again, I think for me the role of city really is simple. Is everyone safe? Is fire police funded? Are the streets paved?
I like that.
And then do you have enough revenue to do things for your community? And better services, better amenities, things like that.
And that's why I wanted to have you on, because I always tell clients, when you're looking to purchase in a particular area, look at the city council, see how things are being run there, because that's going to really tell you whether your price appreciation is going to happen or not, and how rent is as well. So all that really matters. That's how by talking politics a little bit here, I'm tying it back to the channel Full Count. Because Full Count's all about business and real estate. And, at the end of the day, as a city council member or someone that works for the city in a position that you do, it comes down to business. A lot of it, like you said revenue and safety. Without safety, you won't get revenue, right?
Yeah. And it's really, really important. And I think it's important for cities to be looking for ways to enhance their community. I think there's a couple cities in Orange County that are really proactive. And I think that's where I want to make Costa Mesa to get to that point.
Okay.
Like most things in life, cities kind of go through a pendulum.
Right.
Where it's, they go from being revenue centric to being resident centric. And they kind of
revenue centric to
resident centric.
Okay.
So I feel like right now we're kind of in a resident centric era of Costa Mesa.
What does that mean?
So what that means in my eyes is prioritizing capital projects like bike lanes, new park expansions, versus bringing in more revenue. I've tried my best to be balanced in my approach. I've always thought if I want to do cool things in Costa Mesa, I have to make sure I'm bringing in revenue. And I don't like taxing more people. So it's how do you attract businesses. So one thing I'll share with you, a little controversial, but I'll share with the
as
podcast.
much controversy as possible.
Is
just kidding. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, back in 2020, the city council, so it was Mayor Foley at the time, Pro Tem John Stevens, another mayor, and myself were part of a cannabis ad hoc group, and our goal was to figure out how we can increase the revenue for our cannabis manufacturing, which we allowed in Costa Mesa since 2016. What we realized when we were looking at the tax rates they were going through was, one, it was too high. Back then it was at around 8%. And the cannabis industry was being taxed 8% by the city of Costa Mesa and then by the state of California.
Oh, geez.
So it's double
Combine
tax.
them, yeah.
So imagine being in a new budding industry and being taxed double. So what we realized was we couldn't really fix the tax for the state. That's their apparatus, but we could fix it in Costa Mesa. So we dropped it down to 1%. And
that's a big difference.
And because we were competing with Long Beach, because Long Beach wanted to do something similar. So again, it's always good at competition.
Competition always makes things better.
Exactly.
Do you know what the tax base was in Long Beach at that time?
Yeah, so Long Beach ended up lowering it to 0%.
Jeez.
Because they were trying to just get jobs for their residents. So, they're different city, bigger city, they have different problems trying to solve.
Right.
They wanted to solve a problem of like how you get folks jobs. So in Costa Mesa, it was more like how we stay competitive and make sure this industry doesn't die.
Is that because so the different strategies in a way from Long Beach to Costa Mesa, because Costa Mesa already has revenue coming in, as you kind of had stated earlier, and Long Beach didn't really necessarily have that? Is that kind of why?
Long Beach
they made it to 0 and you had it at 1?
Yeah, so what happened was Long Beach went to 0% first, and they were doing it because they were trying to just get people employed. So they viewed it as like, oh, if we make zero tax rate for these businesses, they can hire more people. Right. So in Long Beach and also in Costa Mesa, all the cannabis shops work with labor unions to have like better wages for their workers.
Sure.
So that was their way of like getting their economy stimulated. It's like, oh, lower tax for the business.
Okay.
More folks get hired because they have lower tax rates.
Right. And
then hopefully with that, they'll spend that money in the city. For Costa Mesa, it was different. For Costa Mesa, the cannabis industry began by a ballot initiative back in 2016. They zoned one portion of the city north of the 405, an industrial area. They zoned it for anything cannabis, so distribution, manufacturing, everything except everything except retail or selling it directly to residents, and cultivation or growing it. So what we noticed was because it was in one section, the owners of that section could gouge the rents up because the demand was only in that section.
Right.
So
no competition.
Exactly. Again, all back to free market. It's all about having competition, having the ability to compete. And so we came into that. We formed that ad hoc for that reason. But what we realized was that even with lowering the tax rate to 1%, these businesses wouldn't be successful unless there was enough legal retail cannabis to sell their legal product into. Because the state of California decriminalized cannabis. Right. That meant that if you own a legal cannabis shop and you're told to shut down, you get penalties. You don't go to jail. So we saw in Costa Mesa there's a lot of like illegal trap shops, a lot of legal cannabis shops. So
you said legal or illegal?
Illegal. So what we saw as an ad hoc was, one, there's a need to create more legal cannabis dispensaries. There's a need to fight the illicit cannabis, the illegal ones that weren't following rules.
And I feel like when I would drive by even Costa Mesa or other neighborhoods, you would just see like a hole in the wall, and you kind of already knew that was a marijuana spot. So are those probably the illegal spots?
Those are the illegal spots.
Okay.
And then the final component was we saw an opportunity to revitalize some of these older and like semi-industrial old commercial strips with cannabis retail. So what we did was, we don't want to be presumptuous. We're a cannabis ad hoc, so we're spending more time on the issue. The three of us decided it's best to go to the voters. So we actually made a ballot initiative asking residents of Costa Mesa if they wanted to allow having legalized cannabis retail. And it passed like 66% of the vote. 66% of the vote.
Jeez, that's high, isn't it?
It's like for every 10 people, 6.5 said we want this. So we crafted the ordinance in a way where it would have to be in commercial areas that were kind of like in need of rehab.
So there's still some restrictions.
Yeah. So basically it has to be 500 feet away from schools, parks, sensitive uses like teen centers.
I can see why it passed it. That makes sense.
And the money is going to all general fund, which is code for police, firefighters, park expansions,
Nice.
and then half of 1% is going to fund the Arts Master Plan, which is a plan we have in Costa Mesa to have more art in the city. Again, to enhance more of the cool factor and enhance more property values for those that own businesses and own homes. And also 0.5% is going to a first-time home buyer program.
Wow.
So
okay.
we're trying to do our part to, yeah. So
see, that's how you capture a little bit of everyone.
Exactly. The goal in politics is the art of compromise and persuasion. It's who can you persuade and how do you find a common ground.
And you said 3 of you put that to the ballot box.
Yeah.
What 3 were there? You and
it was me, the old mayor Katrina Foley,
okay.
and the current mayor John Stevens.
Okay.
And we were very intentional. We know cannabis it's a bit controversial.
It still is, yeah.
Yeah, and we wanted to be done by the residents. But that was one way for us to create more revenue.
And it makes sense.
Without
that's
taxing.
the argument.
Yeah.
And then, but the other argument is that people don't like the way it smells. People don't like what it might bring to the city. But the way you said it, how you guys persuaded them, and it's actually a good argument, is essentially it feeds into, you said the arts, it feeds into the fire, police and all that. And what was the other one that you said?
And it was a first-time homebuyer program.
First-time homebuyer. Now that's huge because considering what's the crisis in California,
yeah,
not enough housing, not enough people, young people have the money and means to purchase. So
yeah, so that's kind of what a city does. Their job is to solve the problems for residents, like the basics, like potholes and lights. Is to find more revenue, to have money to play with for the residents.
Right.
And I think a big part of it really is it's bringing in revenue. Like that's the part that's so undervalued sometimes from city governments.
Yeah, and you also said persuasion, though.
Yeah.
How do you use persuasion
to
get your point across?
Yeah, well, the thing about democracy that's great and which everyone should vote is like you always need a majority to get anything passed. So persuasion comes with your council members. It's like, how can we get them on board with something I want to do? How can we find common ground to push things forward?
Right.
What I've found as the country gets more and more polarized is the more local you get, the more room there is for compromise and persuasion and conversation and collaboration.
Right.
I think
that's good. That's smart.
Yeah, and I think city level is really important because again, like that's what dictates how your community is like. You have cities in Orange County that are trying to take funding away from police officers, and we're trying to give more money to officers in Costa Mesa.
And that's always very interesting coming from someone in your party. In my opinion, sometimes you hear on the on the media or social media, because you're a Democrat, right?
Yeah.
A Democrat, a council member. I mean, there was a time in 2020, 2021 when everybody wanted to not everybody, but a lot of people wanted to defund the police and things like that. And it's a little bit different from what you're telling me. Yeah.
One thing I've realized is everyone. See, no one wants to see an officer when they're doing good things, but everyone wants an officer when something bad happens.
Right.
And what we've seen on the city level is that people like their officers. They don't want to be bothered or disturbed for unjust reasons, but fundamentally they're part of what keeps the city safe, right? It's part
100%. Yeah.
So for Costa Mesa, like we recently actually, because right now there's currently like a shortage of officers joining the profession. Probably because of the big movements that happened back in 2020, 2021, we actually augmented the wages for our officers to ensure we weren't losing them to other agencies. So some agencies like Laguna Beach are having to pay like signing bonuses to have officers join their city.
Interesting. You said augmented, right?
Yeah. So Laguna Beach, for example, and a lot of cities in Orange County are having to do signing bonuses for officers, because there's not enough people joining the profession. So it's really important to have the city council members advocate on behalf of the police department and them understand that we know where they're coming from. It's obviously a tough job. There's always going to be some bad apples, but what I always said is I want to make sure that the officers are doing their job, making sure community is protected, aren't being impacted by these bad apples. So, if that looks like more training, happy to do it. But in Costa Mesa, it's really important to have a good tie. So for context, so in Costa Mesa, and we're in the other cities in Orange County because our police department really believes in community policing. So
what does that mean?
Exactly. Good question, right? Community policing is the idea that your officers have ties to the community and that their goal is to be approachable for the public. So back when I was growing up, during like the early Obama years, 2009, 2010, a then council member wanted to have the ICE department, come work alongside our police department.
Mm.
Our police chief said we don't want that because they realize the moment there's a perception that we have ICE working with the police department,
In separation.
it separates the community. Some folks that are immigrants won't call the police if there's an issue. So they've been very intentional since the beginning to make sure that we're always working with the community.
I see.
Even when a prior council had a discussion about sanctuary cities banning it, not banning it, and it got really contentious, the police chief came out and said, we want to trust the community. This conversation divides the community. So to me, that demonstrates that our department is one that tries to serve the community and have ties to the community. And what I've seen in my community is, again, folks don't want to see cops. They don't want to interact with them because they're scared of getting pulled over.
Particular community, or
Yeah.
you're just speaking in general?
Even in general, like most people, don't want to ever engage with an officer. They don't want to get pulled over. They don't want to.
Yeah. Usually, when you meet with an officer, it's usually a bad thing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, or you're getting saved and you're still in a bad position anyway.
Yeah, but they want to know that they're there to like help.
Right.
So we do a good job of working with our school district to fund SROs or officers in the schools.
I see.
Because they help diffuse situations.
Right.
We do a good job of trying to make sure we have a fully staffed police department and that there's trust among both ways. I know in my community, again, I'm in District 4. It's a more lower income part of the city. I do my best to make sure we have, coffee with a cop in my district and make sure
that's good. I see that on Instagram.
Officers.
Yeah.
And that builds trust in the community.
Right.
Because our goal in the council is we want members of the community to feel confident calling the police. Because if you don't call the police, that's when problems start arising.
Okay. So then there's been a major improvement in Costa Mesa then from like 2009-10 till today because of the community policing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I told you about the story once, right? About when I wanted to be a police officer. I went on a ton of ride-alongs in Costa Mesa just because I happened to know officers there. And I decided this wasn't for me. Just because it was nothing but picking up homeless people and taking them certain places. I don't even remember at that time. This was 2012, I think. And I remember a good handful of cops were just telling me how city council was against the police officers, the police department. And then you shared something with me over a drink, and I had no idea. But was it the mayor at the time was a Republican? Yeah. And I would have thought the complete opposite. That she would have been in support of the cops, but in reality, at that time, that mayor was against the police department. Yeah, and this is probably a good example of back to my point about politics, about persuasion and compromise, right? Or the art of persuasion and compromise, because there's always people that have like these theoretical ideas, right? So this Republican council, or majority of the council in 2009, 2010 to like 2014, 15, they were anti-union Republicans. So their whole mantra was like every union's bad, including police unions. I understand. But the reality in any ideology or any theoretical perspective is always caveats, is always exceptions. What ended up happening was they were so anti-union, they're trying to defund the police because their ultimate goal was to like go to like a service contract city where we would contract with like the Orange County sheriffs instead of the actual city police. Yeah, which I think there's a place for it for communities, but for Costa Mesa, it's better to have your own police department because they have more ties to the city. Again, it all goes back to the whole idea of community policing. So then it's not so much that mayor was against police necessarily. She was against unions. Yeah. And instead, she wanted to bring the sheriffs to get rid of that union. Yeah, is what it really is. But the side effect of that was the reality, which is the officers felt undervalued. They felt like they weren't getting support. Yep. They were getting funding cut. So theoretically, they weren't against police per se, but in reality, they were. And that's what we were talking about at one point earlier, that there's theory and then there's reality you got to apply to it. And you got to work with both. You can't just go based on theory because then things can obviously shift in a different direction. Yeah. When reality sets in. Yeah. And, it's one of those things that I enjoy being city council for because we're on the lowest level of government, we're the closest to the ground of the people. It's a lot more practicality than it is theory sometimes, which I think is better for everyone. Right. And is that why you were saying how it's important to focus on city because of that? Okay. Yeah. Now you mentioned something earlier about your district. Yeah. Being, did you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did you say like lower income? Yeah. As opposed to all of Costa Mesa, that one tends to be the more lower income, and why? Yeah. So my district, for context, is those in Costa Mesa, is between Harbor Boulevard and Placentia, south of the golf course down to about Shalimar
and Shalimar Drive. That's the most dense part of the city. It's the most renters live there.
Is that because it's a bunch of like multifamily
Yeah,
apartments?
yeah, and it's also the oldest part of Costa Mesa. So it's the
that
part
makes
of
sense.
Costa Mesa that has been the longest. So people have kind of like neglected it for the longest time. So my district is unique in that sense because while Costa Mesa is about 53% renters versus homeowners, the majority of them are in my district. So
Wow.
so for me, the way I approach city council is different than other people that have, primarily track home housing or more home ownership in their districts. For me, it's more about bringing in services, showcasing their needs to the community at large, and making sure we're trying to solve their problems. So, for example, in my district, a huge problem was the lack of street parking. Right, that's a big issue because a lot more multi-unit housing.
Yeah, they need obviously they're going to need more parking.
Yeah, so
that makes sense.
Yeah, so the past 4 years, I pushed forward an act to reform our existing parking permit system, so that any person could get a parking permit. Prior to the reform, it was only streets that were entirely R1 zoning or all single-family home zoning they can get permits. But there were some streets or some homeowners that felt a bit forgotten because their street may be, half homes, half like single-family homes, and then half apartments.
Got it.
And they can get a permit even though they needed more because they had more impact in their street. So we reformed that. Alongside the way, we're looking at creating like certain zones where people can park in a certain area. So we're currently working on an MOU with a neighboring church in my district.
What does MOU mean?
Memorandum of Understanding, so that people with a permit from the city can park in their parking lot overnight.
Oh, that's cool.
So basically, what it is, we're trying to figure out how it will work, but it might be like we'll repave their parking lot every so many years, as long as they give people access to park overnight.
Okay, so it's a voluntary thing because each side get benefits.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. So because like I'm not for a government of any kind coming in and for the most part and restricting people a certain way. But from what you're telling me, you guys also give back to them by redoing their parking lot.
It's a partnership. It has to be a partnership always. Okay. It's a win-win, right? Our first homeless shelter actually was a partnership. Our first homeless shelter actually was in a church. It was in the church's parking garage, or sorry, the parking lot.
Right.
So what it was the city bought about 4 bungalows, converted them to like be beds / one was like a restroom, and then the church got the chance to serve the homeless residents, which they liked, and got a few capital improvements to their church property, and we had a location for a shelter.
Yeah.
We also, I didn't add this for homeless shelter conversation, but the first homeless shelter was actually in the middle of like downtown Costa Mesa, and no one knew it was there because we had 24-hour patrols so that folks couldn't walk up to the shelter. But also, we don't allow residents to just walk out of the shelter. There's a bus that will take them to pre-chosen spots of the city. So one was like the senior center, one was like the postal office, one was like a bus stop. Because again, these are residents that have jobs. They may not have a home, but they have jobs.
Right.
So we want to make sure that we weren't impacting our residents as we transition towards a more permanent homeless shelter. So it's all about trying to find these like common ground in these like win-win situations. That's what I like about government. It's like, you could be passive, but really, if you want to solve problems, you gotta find ways to bring everyone together and create buy-in to the whole community.
I like that. I mean, I feel like I would already vote for you in a way.
Thank you. Very high compliment.
Yeah, no, it really is. Considering we have different beliefs, but no, that's good because I've gone around other neighborhoods of Orange County because I sell throughout all Orange County and LA too. But I don't see too much of an issue in Costa Mesa, and from what you're telling me, it's starting to make sense why I don't see it as often as other cities that I don't want to name, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'll share a bit about the effects of it regionally. So obviously Costa Mesa was one of the first cities to create a homeless shelter. I think we're like one of the very few. But what happened was when cities realized that we were able to enforce anti-camping ordinances because of our homeless shelter, they were quick to either create their own shelters or or like buy beds at different shelters. So what we're seeing now is,
so you guys set the tone.
Yeah. So what we're seeing now in Orange County is most of the central and north county cities have already kind of figured out their shelter situation. Either they have a shelter, or they rent beds or buy beds from different shelter. And then we're seeing the homeless problem now rise more in South Orange County cities. So it's like San Clemente and others, because they're not moving. Right. The template's there. It's have your own shelter or buy beds, and you can enforce anti-camping ordinances, but they're choosing to not do so. So now the residents can say, hey, well, like, how come we don't just buy a bed? How come we don't make our own shelter? Like, there's now a reason to.
What's their argument for not doing it, though? Considering what you're telling me, that if you have an actual area for them to go, you can do anti-camping.
Yeah, I can't speak for them. I don't know. I don't want to speak on their behalf. They have their own values and stuff. But I know, speaking with some friends I have down in South County, a lot of them want to make their own shelter or rent beds. See, and the irony is there's actually now a benefit in having a homeless shelter in your city. It's now an asset that brings in revenue, because we have a partnership with Newport Beach, and that brings us revenue to help offset the cost of our homeless shelter. So in some ways,
how's that work though? How's that partnership work?
Newport Beach had a big need for homeless shelter. They had looked originally to create their own homeless shelter at the border of Costa Mesa, because they own a shipyard or a corporate yard right in the border of Costa Mesa. But what they realized happened was their residents weren't really in favor of the idea of having a homeless shelter in the city.
I'm thinking like how San Clemente can subsidize another city to, because we're talking about San Clemente earlier as an example, who they can subsidize to house their homeless people.
Yeah. Well,
I would think Dana Point would work with San Clemente in a way, because Dana Point's more prestigious in a way.
I could see I could see, and it's interesting because the South County cities, they're different. They're different than they have different regards for themselves. So I'm curious to see who will move first in South County. I don't want to name any cities because, as you said, it's their own politics. Right. But I think whatever city moves first will have a lot of leverage in discussions.
Yeah, this is where I would love to have also a Republican person too, so I can hear their point of view. But I don't know, man. Like I've sat down with other politicians that are Democrat too, and I've never gotten an explanation like you did. It's usually more like rhetoric and narrative and pushing certain things rather than an actual plan.
Yeah, so, and I think
But I don't think you're. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah. I don't think you're necessarily all that way in one direction, like on the extreme side.
No.
Right?
No, and
because you're talking about capitalism, competition. Sorry, but go ahead.
No, it's look. I mean, we can have a discussion about how fair capitalism is, and the faults of the system itself. We're having discussions on that, but that's what we live in. We live in a capitalist society, so it's like, how can we work our solutions in alignment with that and create opportunities for ourselves to solve problems? Because ultimately, again, like I'll go back to cannabis, with us seeing an opportunity to revitalize old commercial strips. Like that can only happen through competition. It can only happen through creating an incentive for someone to buy a property to rehab it.
Right.
And in that case, it was through cannabis sales. But it's still, at the end of the day, a benefit, because, as you know, if you fix one, to have one shop in a strip mall, the whole strip mall needs to look good.
Right.
Right. It can be one store looks good and then three look bad.
People won't go.
Yeah. So it's about finding opportunities, and I think that's what the law government is, finding opportunities to bring revenue, create more safety, and create cool amenities. One thing I'll talk to you about quickly is also a statewide opportunity right now, with the current governor building more housing. As you know, there's a big need for housing. Yeah, Governor Newsom's pushing really big on housing. Every 8 years, for the audience's awareness, the state gives cities a number. It's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA. This cycle has been a really aggressive cycle. The governor wants to see housing be built, so he's giving a lot of cities in Southern California big numbers. Costa Mesa, for example, was given the number of 11,760.
Okay.
And what that means is we don't have to build that much housing. It's a lot of housing to build, but we need a zone for it, or change the land law so that people can build homes.
How recent did he push that?
This was pushed around like 2019.
Okay.
So right now we're hearing a lot about is probably Huntington Beach pushing back on that. And
so his measure spills over throughout the entire state.
Yeah.
But Huntington Beach precisely is fighting against it.
Yeah. So Huntington Beach is taking the stance of this is a state mandate. We don't want to do it. And they're suing the state of California in a federal court. So trying to supersede California. Their argument is the state can't tell cities how to zone. The state of California is suing Huntington Beach because they're not compliant and they're not following the state law, which is to rezone X number of houses for the city because each city is different.
Right.
And I feel like while, those residents have those feelings and they want their council to fight the state, I view it as an opportunity to really kind of create a new vision for each city. So in Costa Mesa, for example, we actually just did another housing ballot initiative. This one passed by only 22 votes, so it was a lot more close than the cannabis one.
Yep.
That would allow us to upzone certain areas of the city or create higher density.
Okay.
So that was primarily the big corridors of Costa Mesa, so like Harbor Boulevard, Newport Boulevard, Placentia Boulevard, north of the 405.
Okay.
So our idea right now in Costa Mesa is we want to bring in the community because, again, the measure already passed, get their vision of how we want to build Costa Mesa and become more attractive for future homeowners, future renters, future businesses. Our idea right now is the north of the 405.
Yep.
Most people don't think of that as Costa Mesa, even though it is, because it's north of the freeway.
That's like by Fountain Valley?
Yeah, by Fountain Valley, by Santa. Our vision is that whole corridor could be a corridor where people live and work, like on the west end, like near the freeway, and then they bike or walk or bus to work at Andrew and South Coast Plaza on the east end. It's creating a kind of a community corridor to not only have more housing, but make a more active space so that these businesses have more customers nearby, and create a more walkable, bikeable community where people can recreate, spend money, give us more tax revenue.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But real quick, what exactly north of the 405? That's Costa Mesa. People assume it could be Fountain Valley. What's there currently right now?
So currently right now,
because I off the top of my head, I can't think what's there right now.
So on the east end, you have South Coast Plaza and like Metro Point. Then you have a few track homes. Then you have a lot of like potential. So Andrew's coming in, but
Andrew's at defense contracting company. Right?
Yeah, they're coming in on her boulevard, and then everything west her boulevard is just industrial. So that has a lot of potential to be like denser housing,
right?
With like opportunities for like home ownership, opportunities for like just higher high quality apartments to help create a like new engine and corridor up in North Costa Mesa.
So that kind of makes sense to me because you're affecting an area that's not necessarily already where a bunch of people already live in single family homes. So you're building there. Yeah. But I think where the question or the issue lies when it's a single family residence and people trying to convert it to an apartment area.
Yeah, and
that's the pushback, right?
Yeah, and that was the reason why we went for this ballot initiative was we wanted to build a housing in the least impactful way to the residents that already live in Costa Mesa. What we see in Costa Mesa, which is common for most cities in Orange County, is there's usually a few big corridors that have businesses on it, and then between those streets are houses. So what we figured out was like if we want to build more housing, we want to make sure we're preserving the quality neighborhoods and preserving, because people buy homes, and as you know, as a realtor, like that's usually their biggest investment in their life,
right?
Their 100%. Biggest like asset.
Yeah.
So they're naturally going to be fearful of any changes. And we saw that in the votes. Like predominantly homeowners didn't vote for the measure, even though it was designed to protect them, because they had that fear, and it's natural to have that fear of like change. But our vision is we really want to just like upzone these corridors, have like mixed use, and then that north corridor above 405, that's like the crown jewel. That's where we think the most housing could be. That's where we think the most opportunity could be for jobs, and the most opportunity could be for like increased revenue sale.
Interesting. No, but that area that's industrial, those are businesses there too, right? So how does that work? Do they have to just sell to the city?
Yeah. So again, the key of RENA that I think everyone forgets is that cities have to just zone. They don't have to actually build. So
Okay.
what we'll probably do, and we're in the discussion, is we'll probably create an overlay zone or create like a complete change of the zone, which says if you want to sell your property, you can sell it to become a housing development.
Mm.
So that's our goal. Is again, we don't want to push anyone out, but
Right.
for those that own property in these areas, they now have an extra benefit in that they can sell their property to build
Okay.
housing.
I get what you're saying. I mean, does that kind of happen too when people want to expand the freeways to some degree?
A little bit. So
That's a little bit different, right?
yeah, that's more the state just kind of
Yeah, you're right. It is state.
doing eminent domain,
Eminent
unfortunately,
domain.
which
So
we don't want to do in
it's not
Costa
eminent
Mesa.
domain. What you're
No.
Okay, that's what I figured.
All we're doing is just changing the zoning or changing what the land can be used for. So every city in America, land has zones that say what they can and can't be used for. That's kind of why we have like homes where homes are and there aren't factories next to homes, right? Because zoning says it can only be used for this purpose. So that's the challenge that most cities are facing now in all California. And I'm curious to hear your take of how more housing stock will impact home prices and stuff. But the governor is really big on pushing housing. He sees the need to build more housing, and the cities have to adapt to it. So it comes down to.
Right. I'm conflicted with that. One, because I haven't done enough research to kind of give you my input on that, and two, I just for my own learning purposes and probably the audience too. This measure he already pushed. It's already into law, right?
Yeah.
Does he have to oversee cities implementing this in order for him not to go after them, like Huntington Beach? How's that work?
Yeah.
Like, do you have to, as a city, do you have to put in some type of initiative to show the governor that you're following this?
Oh, that's a great question.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So every city, so I mentioned before, the RENA allocation process that happens every 8 years. There's every city has to submit a housing element to the state, or a housing plan, in other words, saying, oh, this is where we plan to build the housing. So what's happening right now with Governor Newsom, what he's doing is this. It's really hard to zone for this many housing units this quickly because zone changes take a lot of time. He's shown that he is content with cities that just submit a housing element that showcases where they plan to change the zoning for the housing. So he wants to see that you're being like a good faith measure, that you're trying to actually like accommodate the number he's giving you.
Right.
Cities like Huntington Beach that are saying, no, we don't want to do that. That's who the governor is choosing to focus on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And their argument is this is well, number one, they don't want to do it. They're also saying that the state is overstepping their powers, and that's why they're suing federally against them.
That is their argument. And again, it has to be federally because they're challenging the state's laws
to supersede them.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I mean,
so yeah, that is interesting. We can go on and on for that on days talking about that.
Yeah, and honestly, like I don't know what's going to happen. Lawsuits are, even lawyers tell you they don't know how lawsuits going to go. They have ideas. They don't have an actual fact base. Like,
what's the argument though to rezone an area though? From my understanding, because I've heard homeowners talk about this a little bit. Their concern is if you rezone their given neighborhood per se, even though they're all single family homes, just for simple purposes, you rezone it and people start selling their home. Developers will go in there and build apartment buildings, right?
Yeah,
is that kind of the issue, and then parking will be an issue.
Yeah, that's a concern, and I don't want to say it's legitimate because it could be legitimate due to your city's makeup. In Costa Mesa, like we knew that was a concern people had, so we wanted to make sure to plan that we can say, hey, this is where we want to build housing. It's not not in your backyard. It's not where you live in your neighborhood. It's on the big corridors and over the 405 freeway. The state, though,
that's what you're saying.
Yeah, the state though is a bit different. The state has already shown with a few recent state laws that they are willing to push down on single-family homes. So two big laws, SB 9 and SB 10, One of them allows you to create a granny flat or like a ADU
Yep.
in the back, which
I see that happening everywhere.
Yeah, and as you know, some homeowners view it as a way to raise their property value, to create more like
cash flow too.
Yep, because you can rent it out to someone else. There's also another state law that would allow you to like split up your lot if it's big enough to like 4 lots. So that's probably what most folks are concerned about.
Is that SB 10 then?
SB 10, yeah.
Okay. Is that kind of correlated to RENA?
Yeah. So cities are allowed to use ADUs as part of the RENA numbers allocation. It's still a new thing, right? Cities are still figuring out how to streamline it, how it's going to play out. What we have seen in cities in Costa Mesa, at least, is that every year there's more and more applications as more people get more used to it or see if it benefits them and their goal for their property. But really what it is, this is the state's version of like property rights, essentially. The state is saying, we want to give the owners of the property the ability to.
That's a good argument to get someone on the other side. That's actually pretty creative of you.
I think honestly is what it is, because this policy isn't really like, if you want to look at it like liberal Republican, it's more like a free market solution, right? And as I said before, it's always pendulums and everything.
Right. No, and just to push back a little bit, the only thing I see with that is there could be an agenda to that, depending on what their priority is, the governor's priority. He might force this new housing, and then some things can change.
And look, I'm not going to get involved in the state's points of views. That's for each of the voters and the bills to talk about.
In 10 years, I'll bring you back when you're ready to stay.
but for me, it's just, I right now, as a council member, we have to implement state law. Like, that's what it comes down to. So for us, it's not a question of like, if like it, we hate it. It's just, okay, we need to pass these laws now to allow ADUs. I'm all about streamlining it, making it more efficient. Because, again, back to revenue. Like, if we make it more efficient, we can create more property value. We can get more tax from that. We can get more tax from like, rental agreements people have with the ADUs. So it's a big conversation to have now in California. Housing's a big topic, and I think what we're seeing with the state right now, and this is my opinion, is the state's kind of taking a more like libertarian free market approach when it comes to housing. I think we'll see more conversations about rolling back regulations that make housing harder and more slow to build. So it's Wild West right now. But
your neighbor, Newport Beach, are they as friendly with this RENA as Costa Mesa is, or would you say they're a bit different?
No, we're pretty lockstep. So Newport Beach and Costa Mesa joined other cities in suing the state for how they allocated housing. It ultimately failed. Basically, all the SoCal cities sued the state, saying, "Hey, we think it should be a lower number." Because what happened was the state.
All the cities you just said.
Most cities, yeah.
But not Costa Mesa.
No, we did too.
Oh, you guys did too.
Yeah, we all did. All of us kind of did it together. It wasn't successful. It didn't.
What year was this?
It's like 2019.
Oh wow.
Okay. Yeah. Everyone, most cities felt like the number was too high. And the reason why I'll share the public, and Adam said earlier, was that the state actually shifted a lot of the housing numbers away from the IE to the coastal communities.
Oh shoot, yeah, that's a big problem.
Because the state had this mentality that like, the more we create sprawl in the IE, the worse it is for the environment, and the worse it is for traffic, because jobs are all
congestion.
Yeah, so we were not happy with that because we got more housing than would have normally been expected.
And I think that's a good argument.
Yeah.
That sounds like something both the Republicans and Democrats could agree on at that time.
Yeah, I mean, most cities were on board.
I kind of can see that point of view too, just because no matter what anyone wants to try and interfere in the free market, coastal communities will always be more expensive than inland cities.
Yeah.
For the most part. And with that said, you can't just force a bunch of housing to come in there just so that more people can live there. And you're just going to have to commute. It just is what it is. That's why the public transit might be more important.
Yeah, and back to full circle, that's why Huntington Beach is suing the state of California in federal court, because Newport Beach and Costa Mesa kind of said, all right, fine, we tried suing, it didn't work out. Let's now figure out how we do it. Because ultimately, the penalties for not having a compliant housing element are pretty severe. The penalties are you don't get state funding anymore.
Oh, wow.
So there is a carrot and there's a stick, So in Costa Mesa, we thought it was best to just say, you know what, we tried suing, it didn't go down. Let's just figure out how we make it work.
Oh, wow. So not Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach is just saying, no, screw it. Let's
Yeah.
just keep fighting.
And
there's some respect that you got to give for them for that too, in a way.
Look, to each their own, right? Everyone
In a way.
answers their own constituents, right? So Huntington Beach, the city council that's suing the state in federal court, they were recently elected in 2022,
Mm-hmm.
and their whole campaign slogan was really like, if you elect us, we're going to fight the state. So they're responsible for their constituents.
Right.
And then the sense that they were elected to fight Governor Newsom.
Okay, so they got elected for saying that they were going to fight Newsom.
Yeah.
And they're fighting Newsom.
Yep.
So you got to respect that. I'm not saying you, but in general, people got to respect that they said they told their constituents or the voters that they were going to do this, and now they're doing it.
Yeah, and that's probably a good pivot to the campaign side of what I do,
Yeah.
because I think the way someone campaigns really demonstrates what their priorities are going to be and what they're going to focus on, right?
Right.
So Huntington Beach, the community felt the need and they felt a draw from that perspective. When I got elected in Costa Mesa back in 2018, the perspective people wanted was they wanted a voice in city council. So I mentioned before that my district was kind of the most like lower income, like
District 4.
District 4, yeah. It's mostly renters. There's a few homeowners as well, a few strips of homeownership, but it's really a renter heavy district. So the campaign for me in 2018 was really a couple of things. It was one, just convincing folks to vote for 23-year-olds because I was over that time.
Yeah.
That one was actually easier than you believe because I grew up in the city and I grew up in that district. So it was pretty simple to be like, hey, this is your street. There's a pothole on that street for this many years, the crack on that sidewalk. Like, this is the issue for the community. Like, it was either have that connectivity because I grew up in that district.
Right, right.
But my campaign really focused on, and I said it before, it was like lack of open space. It was more investments in the community. And it was solving our homelessness crisis.
This was when you first ran,
Yeah,
right?
in 2018. In 2022, I ran unopposed. That was probably the best.
What does that mean, ran out of?
Run unopposed? No one ran against me.
Okay, so going back to 2018, the person you were running against, were they also Democrat or were they Republican, or how's that work?
No, I had two opponents. One was a Democrat, Asian male, and one was a Republican Latino woman. So,
oh wow, so minorities.
Yeah, so
going up against each other.
Yeah, so it wasn't like it was pretty hard campaign. I mean, the way I won that election was basically just knocking every door twice personally.
So you did it the old school way.
Yeah.
Way it's supposed to be done in a way.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I do for a living. I door knock. Okay, I know.
You know how hard it is.
It's
to the door.
hard, yeah.
So, the Asian gentleman, he was self-funded. He didn't have a big campaign. I was actually outfunded by my Republican opponent. But what I love about local politics is that because it's local, it's money only goes so far. Like, it's not like in Congress or like governor where like, usually whoever has the most money wins.
Okay.
There's more ads and more like publicity. At a local level, it's really about like who can talk to the most voters and earn their support. So for me, my approach was simple. It was just, hey, I'm trying to be a voice in the community. We need to solve homelessness. We have more green space. And what happened for me, it was a blessing, was back to my mom, who always volunteered, because she always volunteered. People knew who she was.
That
right?
In, huh?
Right.
A little bit.
I was 23, so all my friends still lived at home. They could all vote for me, and their parents could all vote for me.
Wow.
My stepdad was a custodian at our local school, so they all knew him. So what happened was people organically either knew me or more likely knew someone that knew me and my close family.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
I think that was the really big push was, because again, I had to overcome my age, and I think I did a good job of it. But I think the biggest factor was that people saw that I worked hard and I cared, and that people knew who I was. And like, oh, we know him. He went to school at UCI. He didn't leave Costa Mesa. His mom volunteered. His dad,
there.
Yeah. And that, I think that was the key, honestly.
What's the term in politics where you jump around different areas for an advantage?
Oh, it's called carpetbagging.
Carpetbagging.
Yeah. So it happens more in Congress, honestly.
Okay.
Because Congress doesn't require you to live in your district.
Right.
But
they call the RFK that.
Really?
back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, because he was, I think at the time, because they're from Boston, and he went to New York, and they called him a carpetbagger at the time.
New York has a history of carpetbagging. I mean, Hillary Clinton moved from Arkansas, remember, to New York.
That's right.
I don't know what it is on New York.
Current times, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So like for me, that was kind of the crux of the election, and I think, I think a lot could be gleaned from a candidate and a politician from their campaigns, right? And I think as and watching the podcast, like really look at how someone campaigns, like what's their message, right? Like what are they trying to promote? Is it the standard, like political playbook, or are they trying to push new ideas? Always look at who's paying for the mail. In California, every mail piece that's political has to say who paid for it.
Okay.
Is it the candidate?
Check the fine print.
Yeah, is it the candidate paying for it? Or is it some like weird interest group paying for it?
That's a good tip.
Yeah, but more importantly, what I always say is like vote for a candidate that is from the community and is doing it for the right reasons, right? Like vote for somebody who you believe will actually improve the community, because that's going to impact your property value, the quality of life of the city,
for sure,
and how the city goes. City councils are the conduit which people view a city. If a city council isn't friendly to business, people say, "Oh, the city's anti-business."
Right. That's why I tell my clients, look at the city council members, or look who's running and who's likely going to win, because they could really steer things away for you.
Yeah.
In home ownership in
general. Or be proponents of like home ownership and things like that. So I think it's, back full circle to real estate. Like after you buy a home, like that's the next thing that's going to impact the price of your home. Is the council in my city doing its best to ensure we have quality parks, have quality funding for police and fire, making sure we have good revenue stream for a city, or the city council that's kind of just doing it for their own reasons and they don't really prioritize the residents.
I think that's a good point, because a lot of homeowners tend to get more involved with stuff like this because they're homeowners and they're paying those taxes and things like that. And the renters don't always really pay attention to things like that. Is that right?
A little bit. I mean, it's interesting in Costa Mesa because we're a primarily renter city.
Right.
But by in part, it's easier to be invested when you live somewhere long term. And odds are, to buy a home, it's more likely you're there long term than a renter. There's still renters. There's still renters that stay long term.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But like
sometimes some stay forever, dude.
Yeah, but like I think that's the mark of someone that's more likely getting involved in the community. It's like how long they've been there,
right?
And what's their stake in the community. Yeah, so renters also have a lot of buying in the community if they stay long enough in the community. I think the biggest indicator that someone's gonna get involved and has interest is how long they live in a community. Homeowners typically have more of it because they generally, they own the property. But renters, if they live with me long enough, they also have the same level of engagement as homeowners. It's just a little harder sometimes to be engaged when they might leave to another location.
I'd like to see if there's any statistics with that, because we know we have statistics on homeowners, how long they stay in a given area. And the trend used to be 7 to 8 years before the financial crisis.
Wow.
After the financial crisis, and the longer we go away from that time period, right now it's like trending 13 to 15 years that homeowners stay in their home. But it's gone almost double is what we're seeing.
Wow.
Because property prices are more expensive and things like that. People are staying a lot longer. So I wonder how long tenants tend to stay in a given area.
Yeah, I probably wager to guess that they're staying as long as the rents are affordable.
Yeah.
Right. So like I know in my district, like a lot of residents that are renters that have been there like for like most of my life, like 20 plus years, because they got in there where it was so more affordable that even with like the rental increases, they're still below market rate.
Oh, yeah, because they stay in there.
Yeah.
That's why I always tell renters that if you leave your place and get a new rental and you don't re-sign, you're going to end up paying a lot more, because they can raise the prices more.
Yeah.
But when you re-sign, there's always, according to California, or at least Southern California, there's caps.
Yeah, there's caps. So the state of California passed a law recently that capped rental increases to 10% max, 5% every year no matter what, and then 5% CPI. More off CPI. Yeah. So I know in my community there's a lot more of renters that have been there for a long time, and you see it reflected on prices people pay for rent versus what new tenants pay for rent when it goes to the market. Yeah,
that makes sense. One thing I wanted to mention about your district, which is interesting because you said it's one of the more dense areas, more renters. I was looking up the stats there.
Yeah.
A townhouse. Guess how much a townhouse is? A median price or average price? I know you don't do this for a living.
Probably around like $400K.
No, dude, this is wild. But we're also talking about Southern California.
Yeah.
750,000
Wow.
for a 2 or 3 bedroom. 750,000. A single family home in your given district is in District 4 is 1.1 million.
Wow.
A single family home. But in all of Costa Mesa, when you take into account East Costa Mesa, where it's more expensive because you're adjacent to Newport Beach, when you do the whole median city, it's 1.25 million. So it's still a little bit more affordable, your district, than the other parts of Costa Mesa, but it's still expensive.
Yeah, and that's something that is we're seeing this more and more, that a lot of people that grew up in Costa Mesa really can't afford to live there anymore.
Yeah,
it's like, and I don't, and part of me is conflicted with it because I do understand that Orange County as we know it, in some ways, as I know it, it was like a moment in time because we began developing Orange County around post World War II, right? And now we're kind of built out.
Yeah.
And it's still a great place to live with all the weather and like the amenities.
There's only so much we can do though with building out unless you start building up like New York City.
Yeah, and I think just go back full circle with Governor Newsom. Like I think you mentioned agenda, right? Like
what's his agenda? I'm just to be transparent, I'm not a huge fan of Newsom.
Yeah, I think his agenda might be creating more density to create more affordability.
Yeah,
but we'll see how that plans out. I mean, this is all in flux. This is all, we're watching the state address its housing problems. And what I will say is, it's not only a California problem. Every state has their own issues with housing.
Mm-hmm.
Most states are not in a good place when it comes to people to housing stock. But so California and SoCal in particular is always going to have more competition for limited homes because of the weather, the amenities,
right,
climate, and everything that makes it a great place to live.
Yeah. In closing, I just want you to briefly go over the story of when you first got elected and you debated.
Yeah.
And then any tips you can give the audience or even myself on how to debate someone, considering you had to debate someone.
Yeah, well,
on stage, which is kind of
I had 2 debates. The first one went horribly wrong. It was bad. I was so nervous.
How old were you? Like 23?
I was 23. 24? Yeah, I was 23. The debate was horrible. It was a really weird debate. So what happened was it was all the council candidates on a couch. So that's weird enough already.
That's weird.
And then
you guys are all situated all weirdly.
Yeah, and then the moderator kept fighting with one of the council members, calling him a liar.
Oh, that's not good. They got to be kind of objective, no?
Yeah, well, that's the funny part because that council member candidate was saying that one of the slate of candidates, because everyone ran a slate that year, all the Dems and Republicans as like a team, he was accusing us of being pro-Neil exchange, which none of us were. But instead of letting us say we weren't pro-Neil exchange, the moderator just kept fighting the council member for like 30 minutes. So it was a bad debate. I got like 2 words in.
Oh, because you were just kind of on the side then. It was more between the moderator and that council.
And then what happened was, because it was so limited time with that many people, like I had no words in. So I was really embarrassed. So after that, the then mayor and then pro tem sat me down like, all right, cool. This is not debate prep. You did not do a good job. We got to get you better.
Was it because you weren't aggressive enough?
I wasn't aggressive enough. So what we figured out was
spend a day with me and you'll get super aggressive.
Hey, at the time I probably needed that. But at the
time, you're right.
What I learned was you have to just be assertive and answer your question. So it's like, if there's a question about housing, mention it a little bit, then go to your topic. But the important thing is how you're perceived, and that's what I think is the important thing. I'll leave the podcast with. There's 3 things about anything in politics. It's the perception, the reality, and how you want to be perceived. And that part of how you want to be perceived is when you're a candidate. So they were like, if you want to be a candidate, you need to showcase that you're confident, that you're calm under pressure, and that you can make your point across. So taking debate, I did a lot better.
Yeah.
But one thing I'll say too is debates like that are a little different than like conversation we're having right now with you, Andrew.
Right.
I think sometimes when we debate people in like in real life, not in a formal setting, my goal is always to like debate to understand. So debate to hear your point of view, debate to see your perspective, debate to see where your facts are coming from, and then apply that to my reasoning and kind of see if anything you said could make me a better person in that policy area, maybe a better person in that regard. always
I
find ways to
see.
learn when debating people and
Right.
discussing with people.
But what about that? That sounds very good, and that makes a lot of sense. But what about when you're debating someone that's hard headed and they aren't letting you do that?
Oh,
You have to shift it. Then you have to shift it around the debate.
yeah.
Go back to assertive.
If it's a formal debate, you got to be assertive and demonstrate that you're calm, cool, and collected. But if it's a conversation, it's like, bro, like I know you're coming from, but do you care where I'm coming from?
Okay, so you kind of bring it back on them.
And the answer is no. Then it's like, okay, then what are we doing here? Because you know, if you want to yell at somebody, you yell at the wall. Don't yell at me. I don't have time for this.
Is that kind of part where you use the Socratic method on them too?
A little bit. I don't do it as formal as probably you do. But for me, it's always about like applying everyone's points of view, seeing what they're better at me at, what they know more about me at, and laying that on my perception and my current point of view, and seeing if I'm wrong or if I need to change something. I think it's a constant evolution, right? And I think that's what makes me, as you probably said, more open-minded and more able to like earn your vote because I'm a bigger part than you, is because I'll make sure that what I'm doing is not based off of my party ideology, my party's perspective, but off of reality. Okay. What actually is going to work, what's actually going to solve the problem, and what's actually going to give the residents of my city better safety, better revenue for the city, and better quality of life.
There we go.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Of course, man. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.